And oh, hi.
Hi, everybody. Barry McGuire here for Barry McGuire's Creative Real Estate Education Group. That big smile is because Donna, my sweetie pie and producer, was giving me heck about not being ready. And I just looked up as she hit the go live button. So it's the Monday main event. We meet up on every Monday at 5 p.m. Mountain to talk about creative real estate, all things creative. And we cover a lot of territory on a lot of Mondays. We have lots of experts on. We've had them on talking about development and finance and accounting and tax and various different strategies, all of which hopefully helps you guys in your creative real estate careers. We also, Donna and I, put on focus workshops, and we didn't do very many during COVID, but we're starting to get back into it. We did one in September, and our next one coming up is next weekend, March 18th in Calgary. We are doing a wholesaling, sometimes known as assignments, focus workshop, March 18th in Calgary, a full day event. We feed you properly. We're going to have a ton of experts there. We're going to go through documents, scenarios, how to write deals, how to analyze deals, how to find deals, how to sell deals. It's going to be an action-packed full day. So Donna will put information up in the chat. There it is. Well, you're way ahead of me, Donna, as always. That's pretty standard. Donna is always way ahead of me. So that's coming up next weekend. And then we're in Toronto on April 1st to do an agreements for sale, a different strategy, agreements for sale focus workshop, full day. Agreements for sale are now becoming better known in Ontario. And so there's a demand, and we're going to get out there and do another all-day focus workshop. So today, since wholesaling is coming up next weekend, I mean, something everybody wants to know is, we understand the concept. You get a property under contract. And that contract is an undervalue price. Wholesaling depends on getting a property under contract, undervalued. And then you are not able to close on that property yourself, but you find someone else to buy your contract from you. You assign your contract to a third-party buyer, and they pay you an assignment fee for taking the property off your hands, and then they close with the seller. So it's a strategy that allows people to get started with not much money. And it's pretty simple to understand. I would say not as simple in the execution of it, but that's what we're going to talk about today. Is we're going to talk with folks who have successfully done these deals. And to help us out today, we've got Deb Kennedy, Crystal Royce, and Jared Como to help us out. Here we all are. Deb is wearing glasses. Wave your hand there, Deb. There's a big smile. And I guess if we're talking Jared and Crystal, you can figure out which of those two are Jared and Crystal. Thanks for coming on, you guys. Listen, before we get going, I'd always like to hear what your background is to bring you to where you are in your real estate investing career today. I mean, everybody goes to high school and then you get out and do some things and you have a job probably, and somehow you come across real estate and you do things. Deb, let's start with you. Give us the brief history of Deb Kennedy and what happened after high school to get you to where you are today.
Well, I guess the short story is about 14 years ago, my husband and I left our perfectly good union JOBs as a cop and a nurse and started a renovation company. And so we've been doing that together for, quite a while now. And we're just in the final stages now of getting our builder's license and our new home builder warranty. So it's been quite a journey.
Oh, my goodness. Well, so you've been at it quite a while, and obviously it's been successful enough that you want to now not do just renovations. You want to build new homes, and that is a process to get that license and get going. And you were a cop and or a nurse before you started doing that. Now, as you carried on with your renovation business, I know because we've chatted before that you have done things other than renovations. How did you kind of get off the just doing renovations to try and do some other things along with your renovation business?
So once I started down the small business entrepreneur path, I kind of discovered, hey, I kind of like this small business thing. And so we just grew a couple of other little side gigs. So we don't do a million wholesale deals. It's just one or two a year. We've tripped into one or two rent to own properties. So we have some side gigs that just kind of supplement our main business.
They just kind of show up, don't you? When you're around real estate, things start to show up. And that's something that I think folks who have been in any kind of real estate business for a while, if you're in and doing and you're interested, people get to know and stuff just shows up. So, all right. Well, Deb, thank you for that. Crystal, let's move over to you and give us the post high school journey to where you are today.
Gosh, yeah, I will try to keep this as brief as possible because high school was so long ago. Yeah, I went to college for massage therapy, and it wasn't really something that I really enjoyed. I didn't end up pursuing that. And then, I did a bunch of miscellaneous jobs to kind of keep afloat. I'm originally from Windsor, Ontario. And so back in 2009, I decided to move out to Calgary and start a new life. And that's kind of when I started getting into insurance. And so, yeah, I've been working on the claim side of insurance for a really long time. And it doesn't exactly light my soul on fire. Let's just say that.
Yes.
So what's funny about it is insurance keeps you really busy, and I think that's the point of it. So you don't have time to really think about what you want to do elsewhere. And I was lucky, or maybe not so lucky, in 2018, where I had gone through a bunch of car accidents. Like I had 3 accidents and like concussions back to back to back.
Oh,
Yeah, it was awful. And needless to say, I was taken off of work like on and off for years and years, and still dealing with some symptoms today. But the saving grace in that whole situation was that it gave me the opportunity to really reflect and do some introspection to see where my life was and how unhappy I was doing what I was doing. And then it got me thinking, well, what else can I do? Like, what are my options? And so then I started to just do some research. I knew that I did not want to go back to school. That was a no-no. And so I was like, well, what can I do? Like, I have no idea. And then somehow I fell into real estate. And like most people, I was like, okay, well, I can get into real estate, but I was under the impression that you needed to have money in order to make money in real estate. But then I did more and more digging, and that's when I found the creative investment side of real estate, and wholesaling specifically, because I didn't have any capital to get started. And then relatively quickly, I decided that I wanted to pursue wholesaling. However, it took me a few years to really actually bite the bullet just because I was still struggling so bad with my concussions.
yeah.
Yeah, so it wasn't until about uh, August, September of 2021 when I started networking and like getting into real estate and actually like taking action versus just reading about it and wanting to do it. And then through networking, I actually ended up meeting Jared, and he was kind enough to mentor me and help me along the road of wholesaling. And now we're business partners, and the rest is history. So that's, yeah.
That is such a good story. I mean, it's such a good story on so many so many levels. I mean, how you progress, and so many people have jobs that are just they're excruciating. It puts food on the table, and you don't have other prospects, so you stick with the job, and it chews up all your time, and you're happier and unhappier. You just are unhappy and getting unhappier. Now, it's a shame that you had to get in 3 car accidents to kind of move yourself along, but let's everybody cross our fingers here and hope that you will fully recover from all of those concussion symptoms, and since you're well into your new career, that will again hopefully all work out for you, man. Thank you for that, Jared. Let's move over to you and give us your post-high school busman summary of how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, goodness. Okay, so I mean, straight out of high school, I knew. Well, it's funny. I didn't know what I wanted to do after high school, and a counselor brought me in and said, "We will pay all of your tuition for books and everything if you go to school for cooking." So I took that and I became a Red Seal chef. So I did that, realized it wasn't for me. Then I went and got my Red Seal HVAC ticket. That wasn't it for me either. And then I got into heavy equipment. And heavy equipment, I've always had a passion for that. And I took schooling for it, became certified in it. And that was when I was living out in Kelowna. And I moved to Alberta with the intention of working in the oil sands. Well, when I moved here was 2014 when oil tanked. Exactly. So turns out I never stepped foot in the oil sands up north. I ended up just digging basements for Mattamy Homes. And that's kind of where I kind of started dabbling into real estate a little bit, but not too much, more the construction side of things. Yeah. And in January 2019, I had to make a very tough decision. When I was younger, pretty much straight out of high school, I discovered credit, this thing called credit. I was young, I was dumb. We know our schooling systems. They don't teach you a thing about that kind of stuff. Next thing I knew, I had 2 maxed out credit cards and a maxed out line of credit. And I was borrowing from my line of credit to pay my MasterCards and borrowing from my MasterCards to pay my lines of credit. It was, needless to say, a disaster. And when somebody gets in that kind of position, they always think, "Oh, I can dig myself out. I can dig myself out." So I kicked that can down the road for probably the better part of 12 years. Wow. 2019 came along and I just realized, you know what? I have no choice. I have to file a consumer proposal. So unfortunately, I had to make that extremely tough situation, that decision. And I promised myself, I swore to myself, I would never put myself in that situation ever again. That's when I started trying to figure out wealth generation. And I went through a whole bunch of different things, Forex, drop shipping, and I came across real estate. And then I went all in. I've been contributing. I started contributing everywhere, asking questions to all the Facebook groups. And that's when the very Mr. Wayne Hillier found me. And he took me under his wing. I went to his very first cabin retreat in September 2019 or October 2019. And that's where we came up with a plan that because I didn't have any capital to my name and I couldn't borrow toilet paper to go to the bathroom from the bank, that the best way to get started and build myself a bit of a seed fund and get some capital going was with wholesaling. And realistically, that's where it all started. That was kind of the beginning of the journey. From there, the rest is history.
Okay. All right. Well, that, you and Crystal kind of, you're attracted to wholesaling for at least probably a similar reason, which is once you've researched it and you understand how it works, you can see that this is something that if you can put some effort into it, you can do wholesaling and make money without a whole stack of money. I mean, that's key for people who don't have any money, and that's one of the key items, I think, about wholesaling. So, folks, anybody who's listening, Jared mentioned Wayne and Gabby Hillier's cabin retreat, and that's when you go with Wayne and Gabby to this beautiful cabin, we call it, but it's a beautiful house. I think it was at an Alberta lake close to Edmonton, and you spend a weekend with them talking about who you are and where you want to get to and what your plans are, and getting through the things that are blocking you. And at the end of those weekends, most people come out of there with an idea about how to move things forward, which is what happened to you, Jared, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I didn't know the first thing about the first thing going into that cabin retreat, right? I had no idea where I fit in the whole real estate sector.
No.
I had no idea.
Well,
and yeah.
All right. Well, so that's those are all such interesting stories, and I personally love hearing them. It makes me understand who you folks are a little better and where you're coming from and where you're going to. So I think it's important to hear those things, especially on the wholesaling side, where people are going, what am I going to do? You know, how can I get started in real estate? So that's important to know. Deb, let's move back to you. And when we're doing our wholesaling workshop in Calgary next weekend on March 18th, we are going to be using that very valuable call log that you provided to us some time ago. Deb was making calls, as you have to do, trying to find deals. And she kept a really great log of all the calls she made to who she was calling, what it was all about, how it seemed to her. And so when people are going, well, how do you do this? This will be one of the things we'll be sharing at the weekend coming up. Now, Deb, you've got a couple of wholesaling stories to tell us. So should we start with the one that you would run away from, or do you want to start with the successful one? What do you want to do?
I think my job tonight is to do the run away from stories.
Okay.
So do you want to do other people's success stories first?
Well, let's hear the run away from. I mean, so in the wholesaling world, you have to find deals, you have to make calls, and there's only so many deals that work there. You'll make a lot of calls we'll say, thank you very much for chatting with me. If this changes, get back to me. And you'll get off the phone and go, I don't think that one's ever going to work. So you're going to make a lot of calls with that answer. And some of them that you wouldn't say that from, you'll go, oh, I hope I never see this deal again. Anyway, let's talk about the one that you would run away from.
So there's two. There's one that I ran away from because of what was on title, and there's one that I ran away from because of what was in the comparables.
Okay. All right. Well, let's have it, and in all the detail you can muster. Let's have it both.
So the one that I ran away from because of title, I call up the seller. It all sounds good, very motivated. I can see just from a quick peek online what the value is. I can hear what she wants to sell it for. Everything sounds really good to me. I'm getting ready to go to the house, so I'm just doing my background, So I tend to run my wholesale deals harder than I would any regular purchase. So like I'm Googling the seller, I'm Googling the address, I'm, looking up for, just quick what else is on the market in that area. So anyways, I do all that. Everything's looking cool. And then I plug in the title. It has more pages than I've ever seen for a title. There are instruments on there. I don't even know what they are, but I can see the 3 letters CRA, and I can see that the bank has done multiple instruments on title. So when I add up all of the instruments on title, I forget the exact numbers, but let's say it was worth 400. She wanted to sell it to me for 350. I can see that on title, there's at least $500,000 worth of stuff right there. Yes. And some of the CRA stuff is from 2 years ago. So with all the interest, it's going to be even way more than that.
Yeah.
So I call her back and politely ask, are you aware of this, that, and the other thing? Anyways, it turns out the poor lady was in the process of a divorce and had no clue that her husband had used the house as collateral for this, that, and the other thing. She was just trying to get out of a divorce. So when it's a lousy situation like that, I'm always like, the nurse in me is just feels for another woman in a bad situation.
Yes.
And so I just referred her to a credit counseling agency to see if they could somehow help her save her credit. I don't know if they could, but I tried.
Well, folks, that's a really good story from Deb, who has, you can tell from the way she's talking to us about this, so that she's got experience in making these kinds of calls for a potential under market property. So you're not always, when you make these calls and you're looking for an undervalued property, it's not always because you're a wholesaler. I mean, Deb could be calling because it would be a good renovation, a good fix and flip for her renovation company. So you call for a bunch of reasons, but you have to learn how to ask the seller questions, and you have to learn how to do a certain amount of quick diligence, quick checking on the property to figure out whether you're going to expend more of your valuable time chasing it. So everything was matching up till you looked at the title. And so as a teaching point, titles are a thing that we believe, and folks with experience in real estate generally and wholesaling particularly, once you've come to the point where you go, this checks out, that checks out, this is good, that's good, we always recommend that you get a copy of the title if you're serious about taking another step, because the title has a ton of information on it. Titles are public record. As long as you have an address for a property, you can get a title. And so it's public record, and it's got lots of information on it. And in this case, it was probably saved Deb a whole bunch of, not exactly heartache, but a whole bunch of chasing this deal, which in the end would have failed, because sooner or later you would have come up with that information and you would have come to the same conclusion. This poor lady didn't know anything about it, and her husband was using the house as his charge card. So you make calls, you do some diligence, and you see whether or not there's the possibility of moving it forward. And there's a lot that don't move forward, as we all know. Okay, so that was a really good one, Deb. Let's maybe we'll move over to Crystal and Jared, and you can save your second one for the next go round.
Yeah.
All right.
Do you want me to go? I'll go first.
Crystal, let's hear from you.
Yeah, and Deb, actually, it's funny because that's happened to me quite a few times where I've been talking to seller and everything seems like it's going great. And then all of a sudden I find out that the husband has taken out money in the property. And so with all the liens that are against the property, there's never a way to make it work, unfortunately. And it really is heartbreaking, because a lot of these people don't even know that it's happening until they go to sell, and then they're kind of screwed. So it is a really sad when you come across people like that. But yeah, so success. Okay. So, well, the most recent one is probably my favorite. So I'll talk about that one. So I am linked up with a awesome realtor in the Edmonton market who has access to a lot of off-market deals. And so this deal was going smoothly. We had essentially signed all of the contracts, had it assigned, everything was fine up until the very last minute. And that's when the seller had added in to the contract that I would be responsible for the fees of the realtor. And he did that without me signing or anything. He just kind of added it after. And let me back up a little bit, because essentially, because this was an off-market deal, the seller wasn't interested in paying any realtor fees, but because a realtor was involved, there's a fee associated with that, right? And so essentially it got to a standstill where I wouldn't sign, the seller wouldn't sign, and the seller refused to pay the realtor fees. And I literally was watching this deal like explode right in front of my face. And I was just like, oh my God, okay. I'm like I was stressing out because I wanted to help the seller. I already had an end buyer and I didn't want everyone to be out, right? So really what I had done was I slept on it and realized that there was still a way to save this deal. And so I ended up talking to the realtor and I said to him, like, look, you're not getting paid regardless. So would you be okay with walking away from this deal? And if I'm able to close on the deal, I will give you a little bit of money for all the work that you've done. And he was like, yes, that's great. Please. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he was like, yes, that's great. He didn't want to deal with it anymore. He was like, I'm over this guy. I am over this guy. So anyways, so I ended up contacting the seller and let him know who I was. And I essentially just said, look, I was like, how are you doing? He's like, very stressed out. I'm like, I can imagine. I understand that you've gone through a lot these past couple weeks, and all you want is to not have to pay realtor fees. So I want you to know that I've spoken to the realtor and he's agreed to walk away from this deal. And then we can work this deal out where you will get exactly the price that you want. You will not have to pay realtor fees and we will get your house sold. He was like, beautiful. That's beautiful. That's all I wanted the entire time. So great. So essentially we had to get ready. We had to void the other contracts, do up new contracts, which he was perfectly fine doing because everything that he had gone through before was essentially a nightmare compared to just signing new contracts.
Yeah.
And he was actually like a really great guy. He just didn't want to pay realtor fees.
Yeah.
And so in the end, it was a process for sure, but it was like it's closed, everyone's paid, and everything is done now. And in the end, regardless of how much of a struggle and how stressful it was very rewarding at the end because I was able to help literally everyone. So
That's such a good story. That's such a good story on so many different levels. There's when it's an off-market property and there's a realtor involved, that's always harder. That's always harder. Off market means it's not listed, and if it's not listed, then the what the realtor may or may not be doing for the seller is often fuzzy and unclear. And it sounds like that's what happened here. Seller was never expecting to pay realtor fees. Realtor's doing work and expects to be paid, but they didn't make that clear. So that's why that comes up. So you got to be careful, folks, when it's off market and there's a realtor, because you can run into this exact situation. Now, before we get over to Jared, Crystal, can you give us? Are you okay giving us some numbers? I mean, what was the property like? What was the offering process to get to a number? What did the realtor want? Finals. Can you run through that for us?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So essentially, the seller wanted around 400,000 for the property.
Mhm.
And we did a bunch of counters and finally got it to 355
Oh.
purchase price, and we sold it for a 10K assignment fee. And yeah, and so the other thing is that when I had spoken to the realtor about this, I let him know, and this is like a little trick people can use. I let him know that I'm going to give him $1,000 out of this deal, And the next 2 deals that he brings to me, I will give him $1,000 out of each of those deals. So it provides him with incentive to give me more deals to make everyone more money. So that's like, this is a tidbit of like advice for people.
Good one.
And sorry, go ahead.
Good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so $1,000 on a deal. So what did you think the value of the property was? I mean, you got it for 355. What did you think the market value was?
Market value is around 4.
It was around 4. Okay, all
Yeah,
right. So
exactly.
$45,000 spread. You got a $10,000 assignment fee. That means the ultimate buyer has $35,000 worth of equity to work with.
Well, sorry to interrupt, but I didn't specify that. Based on the comps in the area, the after repair value is going to be anywhere from 560 to 595.
After repaired it. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So your buyer's going to have to put some effort and money into the property, but what do you think, or did you have any sense of what that would mean for your ultimate buyer? I mean, what's he going to make on it? What's his spread?
So, oh gosh, these numbers, I haven't thought about them for a minute. So it depends on the renovation. If they can do it, under 100 or around 100, so that's, I'm doing math in my head right now. 360, 465. They can stand to profit probably $40,000 and up, depending on how much renovation costs are.
Sure.
So
your ultimate buyer is happy to pay you $10,000 to get a deal where he has that profit margin.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if they hit the high ARV, they're going to be making a lot of money. A lot of money. So
that's a conservative. When you talk 40, that's a conservative number. So I like your tip of talking to the realtor and saying, hey, $1,000 here. And guess what? I do this. If you bring me deals, I will pay you on the next 2 $1,000 each. So from the realtor's perspective, if he has properties that come across his desk that he can't do something with, but there's room to do these kinds of deals, he's happy as a clam to say, Crystal, guess what? I mean, and this is what successful wholesalers need, is relationships with people who think of you when they think of deals they can't do, but someone else might be able to do. So very important part of building any wholesale business. Good for you for realizing that and saying it to him right away. That's a good one. I like that.
Thanks.
Well, Jared, looks like it's your turn to tell people about, I know you've done a few deals, but just tell us about one successful deal and
let's talk about my first deal that I've ever done.
Okay.
So this happened in about, I believe, early 2020. So this is fresh out of wins, cabin retreat. I'm spreading my wings. So I start calling people, doing cold calls on Kijiji ads and everything. And I'm new. So I'm calling everybody, including out of city, Edmonton, Hannah, Delburn, Alberta, all these places. And I actually get a hold of one seller in Edmonton. And he has a apartment style condo on Jasper Ave for sale. Now, this is on the west end of Jasper Ave, a little on the other side from everything, all the fun stuff of downtown. But it's a nice area anyways. It's south facing, so it overlooks the river valley and everything. Anyways, he originally is asking $300,000 for this apartment style condo. And, humming and hawing, doing my research, pulling up all the comparables. I counter back to him. I say, I could probably make it work at $350,000. Now, my ARV on this property is about, 230. All these numbers are 300. I offered him 250. My ARV on the property was about 350 with a high-end flip. So at 350, you got $100,000 spread on a condo. Condos typically, $40,000 max to get it looking really nice. And so I had a good deal in my hands. He counters at 360. Could I make it work at 360? Yeah, probably. But before or 230, sorry, I get these numbers all mixed up here. I'm so sorry. So he counters at
he's countering at 260.
Counters at 260. I'm like, this could work. But before I say yes to this counter, I want to see your condo documents. I want to see your estoppel certificate. I want to see your reserve fund study. I want to see all of it. And he's like, yeah, okay, I'll get those ordered for you. So he gets those ordered, and maybe 2 days after I request those documents, unfortunately, one of my very good friends passes away in a car accident. So everything in my life hit a standstill, right? I'm grieving, and it's just a crazy process. It's like, is this whole real estate thing worth it? I'm like, life's too short. Do I need to be worrying about business when I could be worrying about family? That kind of stuff, right? So 2 weeks goes by, and I'm in Kelowna for the funeral. And on the drive home from Kelowna, the seller, now you have to think, I've completely ghosted this seller. I've completely stopped responding to his texts, haven't been answering his calls, nothing. He's leaving me voicemails, and I'm listening to the voicemails, but I'm not really listening to them, if that makes sense. And he's sounding desperate in his voicemails. So on my drive home from Kelowna, he calls again, and I'm like, you know what? Like, fine, let's talk. Like, what do you want? Like, I haven't talked to you for 2 weeks. It's clear that I'm not interested anymore. What do you want? So I answer the phone, and we have a conversation, and maybe 2 minutes into the phone call, Jared, can we get a deal at like $230,000? And I'm thinking, in my mind, yeah. But it would work better at like $210,000. So let's see how far we can push this envelope. Because at this point, I'm like, real estate, forget it. I like, life's too short. So I just throw a number out there. I'm like, you know what? 230. Yeah. I mean, I looked at the condo documents, and there's a few concerning things in there. 210 would probably work a lot better for me. And he's like, oh, 210. He's like, and he tells me, Jared, I gotta be honest with you. Like, I bought this property in 2016 for $400,000. I'm like, wow. I'm like, yeah, this was in 2020. And I tell him, like, yeah, I understand that. You have to understand also, though, that if you look at apartment style condos, they've tanked. Like, they're not, like, the value of them have almost been cut in half in the 4 or 5 years since you bought it. So I mean, I can make it work at 210. And he says, okay, let me talk to the wife, and I'll get back to you. So I drive home, I get home, and the next day he calls me up, Jared, I can't go any lower than 220. I just can't. Like, that will cover my mortgage. That will be no money in my pocket. But it will cover all of my obligations. I'm like, okay, you know what? 220 it is. Let's do it. So wrote up that contract, got him to sign it. And I had that property assigned within 24 hours for a assignment fee of just under $18,000. So I got the property under contract for 220, and I assigned it for 237. So the lesson that I learned from that one, and I mean, don't do this to all of your sellers, is maybe sometimes ghosting them just
No, no.
right. Like, especially if they're desperate, if they're super desperate and somebody shows interest in their property, and you're in the middle of negotiations and things are looking promising, and then all of just a sudden, poof, they're gone. That's going to create a little bit of desperation in them, and they're going to want to really get a hold of you to try to sell your house. So he went from asking 300 to accepting 320. Sorry, 300, accepting 220, simply because he was desperate to get out of this property. And you kind of have to separate wants from needs, right? He wanted 300,000. He needed 220, right? So he just went with what he needed as opposed to what he wanted. So we got that under contract, signed it. Was this unconditional? Paul, no, there was an inspection condition. There was a condo document review condition for my ultimate buyer, so that they had the opportunity to look through all those documents themselves. So that's my success story. That's my very first wholesale deal back in 2020.
Well, that is that's an amazing story. So as Jared said, he's not telling anybody listening that a classic technique that you should employ all the time is to start negotiations, get it to some stage, and then ghost your seller. He's not saying that. He's saying it might be effective every once in a while. And this was inadvertent. I mean, you didn't talk to him for a couple of weeks because you were completely tied up and really ruined because of your friend's untimely passing in a car accident. You weren't employing it as a specific strategy. That's just what your life was doing.
That's right.
So yes, folks, you do have to separate wants from needs. When Don and I teach our focus workshops, one thing we say is we don't want to beat people up and take advantage of them. But on the other hand, we are also in business, and sellers are entitled to make the kinds of deals that in the end will work for them. So you have to find your own path through and getting yourself to what's win-win. And in the end, if 220 was what he needed and that's what he was prepared to settle for, then it was a win for you and a win for him. So that was a good one. Deb, let's go back to you and talk about another deal that showed up on your radar that was also not a good deal.
So this one is quite recent. A bunch of people will probably recognize the story. So the deal is brought to me by an Ontario investor, and it's about 4 townhouses that are for sale in Alberta. And they're looking at the deal and wondering if it's a good deal. So, they bring me all the details that they have. As the story unfolds, a lot of people have already looked at this deal. So I'm pretty sure I know what the answer is before I even hear the details, but I'm like, bring the details. Maybe there's something there. So it's another divorcing couple. They really want to sell. The original purchase price, I don't know, let's say 2014, 2016, somewhere in there, is $150,000 allegedly for each townhouse. So anyways, then I hear that they want to sell each townhouse for $75,000. Well, maybe there's a deal there. Those numbers are sounding pretty interesting to me. So we pursue it a little bit further. As it turns out, the townhouses are all in a tertiary market in Alberta. So for me, that's strike one, because I already know I have very limited exit options.
So
it's not a deal killer.
What is, for folks who don't know what that is, what is a tertiary market?
So primary market in Alberta would be Calgary, Edmonton. Secondary market would be like your suburb cities. So let's say like a Cochrane, Okotoks. And tertiary market is small town.
Small town.
Okay. So, and the farther the small town is from the big places, the less I'm interested. But it's not a deal killer if the numbers are working. So I keep going, but I know I'm already at strike one. So then I look at the actual properties, and 2 of these townhouses are 2 bedrooms and 2 are 3 bedrooms. but they're all valued the same.
Hmm.
So for me, that's strike two, because there's something that there's a little bluffery going on, and I don't totally trust the seller. And then I look at the comparables, and the most recent comparable solds are 35,000 and 37,000.
Whoa.
I don't know what the problem is with this complex of townhouses. I just know that there are people even more motivated than these people. So I'm out.
Wow.
That was 3 strikes. I'm out.
So that's where you looked at the comparables and said, okay, that's strike three. If they're selling for 35,000, it just cannot be. Something's wrong.
Yeah, I could have pursued it further. I have been to this small town. It's not one of my favorite small town places in Alberta, and I actually quite like some of the small towns in Alberta. It was easy for me not to put any more time into investigating this opportunity.
Yeah, you like we said, you will look at a lot of deals, and you have to poke at it and prod and get information, and you also have to kind of know who you are in the wholesaling deal. So if you listen to Deb tell this story, she already had before she ran into this deal, she already knew that strike one was properties in small towns in Alberta. Is a strike. That's a mark against the deal to start with. Doesn't mean, I guess if it's in Alberta's very best small town, that's one thing, but overall in a small town. So you need to have your own kind of markers and measuring sticks by which you can quickly assess deals, because you can spend a lot of time looking only to go, you know what? I knew it. Like half an hour into it wasn't going to work. And here it is. It's not going to work. So that's important to know. And you'll do a lot of those. Now, Deb, those were 2 unsuccessful ones. Are you able to tell us about a successful one somewhere along the line? Or would you like us to go back to Crystal and Jared for those?
I'll just say that my favorite successful deal is a reminder never to make assumptions about why people are selling, because it was just a relatively young guy who was in love, and he would have done anything to get out of his house and be with the lady that he loved. So he was willing to do an amazing deal. He just wanted out of that house because he didn't want to live in it anymore. He wanted to live with his lady love.
That is such good advice. There is just no accounting for seller motivation. And if we, as the creative investors, put our own spin on why sellers are doing things, that will prevent you from doing a lot of deals. You will reject deals because you'll go, why would anybody do that? And there's, that is a motivational reason that I've never heard before. But there you go. There's no accounting for why sellers do things. That is really a rock solid thing that all of us who are successful in this game, you understand that for sure.
Yeah.
All right, let's go back to Crystal and Jared. Crystal, have you got a kind of a deal you can tell us about? You told us about your most recent one. Have you got maybe a favorite one, or a one where you made a ton of money and you really liked it that you can speak to?
I have one that is interesting that I actually, because this one's quite interesting and it actually didn't go through. Can I talk about that one?
Oh, sure, of course.
Okay. So this one is really interesting and a good story to tell, just because of how everything had transpired. So essentially this was a property on Kijiji. And we had went to the house, and the seller was actually super reasonable in her ask price. And it had to be sold to like an investor for a flip because it didn't have a kitchen. So but still a really great house. And we were like, Jared and I, we were about to get it under contract. Everything was going swimmingly. And we had made a mistake on having some investors walk through the property on the day that we were going to do the signing. And that was mistake number one. So advice is, of course, always make sure you have the signed contract before you have investors walk through the property. And so what had happened was the last investor that was walking through the property ended up talking to the seller, which again, if I have any advice to anybody, is to prep the investors to not talk to the sellers as little as possible, because it can completely mess up the deal. And so this investor was just trying to help. However, the seller didn't understand that. And so when the investor was talking to the seller, they had asked if they wanted to make a little bit more money. And at that point, the seller was, red flag, like, why are you asking me if I want to make more money? Like, are you trying to steal this deal? Like, what's happening? The seller was so confused. When in reality, the investor was just trying to do, God, I'm totally blanking on the strategy.
So
Jared.
So when we brought this other seller through, what they ended up trying to do was pitching AFS.
Yes.
While so I was the main contact on this deal, and again, like Crystal said, big mistake. We brought people to walk through the house with us before we had a signed contract. That was when I was early on in the process. My bad. Never again. So I was downstairs showing another investor like the basement, and this other person was upstairs trying to pitch the seller to hold the mortgage for the duration of the flip.
Right.
And the seller took that as trying to do a side deal with them.
Yeah.
And that just blew the whole thing up.
Yeah.
And so I come back upstairs, everybody leaves. We start doing our table talk, and the seller's like, you just about lost the deal. Like, somebody came through and tried to pay me more for my house right under your nose. I'm like, well, it's not exactly what was going on, right? So, the seller ended up agreeing to our offer, and we gave this seller the exact amount that she asked for, which was super rare from a seller because they were being very reasonable with their ask. They're asking $500,000. That's about what I was going to offer, because ARV on a fully renovated bungalow in that neighborhood was about $850. So nice. I was like, okay, I'll give you $500. But then the seller's like, and I think the seller was getting some bad information because they didn't realize they could put a condition on the purchase of their new home that is conditional upon the sale of their existing home. Right. So she thought that she needed to sell this one before she could even start shopping for another one.
Right.
So she's telling me, she's like, I need to stay in the house for like a month after possession. I'm like, okay, so that's like a tenancy will, right? Sure. Sort of.
You could do that.
Yeah. And we're going to. Now, the end buyer who was going to buy this from me said, okay, well, if this person wants to stay in the house after possession, I need a walkthrough, move in, move out walkthrough. I need tenant insurance. I need, this needs to be legal, right? Because if she slips and falls down the stairs after possession during that month, I'm in trouble. I'm in trouble if she doesn't have insurance, blah, blah, blah. She didn't want to do any of that. None of it.
Yeah.
So that eventually ended up killing the deal because she didn't want to do any of that. A year later, I pulled title just out of curiosity. She actually ended up selling it for $10,000 less than what we offered her, just because somebody else said, Yeah, you don't have to do any of that. You could
Yeah.
stay for an extra month.
Sure.
So just because my ultimate buyer felt more comfortable doing it legally. So sometimes that just happens, right? Sometimes you can't
This
give
is
this.
the stuff you learn. This is the stuff you learn.
Exactly.
I
100%.
mean, who's to know? I mean, you would never let investors or any potential third-party buyer through until you have it under contract. The stay in the house a month after closing is a very powerful tool for a seller who's moving on to a new property. That the notion of getting bridge financing and making I'm selling and I'm buying at roughly the same time fit together gives sellers fits. It's not really that hard to do, but it does give them mental fits for sure. And so, in another circumstance where you were buying not to wholesale, but to flip, and do the renovation yourself, that's a closer technique. Oh, really? That's your issue? Absolutely. Give them the month and they sign right now. So it's just what you learn as you go through this business, and as you understand the subtleties and the nuances and what the motivations are. You learn more, and you can adjust on the fly as you understand how the pieces fit together, and as you learn how to judge people and really suss out of them what their needs are, what their hot buttons are, what they really want on a deal. I mean, we all get better at that as you do it. I mean, you got to get started and learn. It's none of us know all these things. I'm sure if you listen to Deb talk, she's with 14 years of experience here. She understands how all these pieces fit together, and not that she hasn't made mistakes, and not that things haven't always gone, the way they're supposed to go. But that's wonderful for people to hear. I really appreciate you guys coming on and talking about these things, because there are successes and there are things that don't work out, but it's all about a learning process. It's all about understanding that these kinds of deals show up all the time. Death, debt, and divorce. I mean, those things are happening every day. Every day, there's somebody else who just can't get out under their crushing debt load. Somebody loses a job. Somebody loses a spouse. Something is just totally ruined their world. And so deals come up all the time. And it's not like if you missed one, you're missing them all. So I really enjoyed this today. I love hearing these real life stories. I learn the best by hearing how it's worked out for people. So, and overall, these stories are all positive. And so on a finishing note, because we're almost at the end of time. Any last comments from anybody? You don't have to have a last comment if you don't really have one. Deb, any nuggets for people as we're moving out the door here?
I don't know if you can hear me over top of my chatterbox husband.
Yes.
So my tidbit is, I think a lot of coaches love the stories about people who bought 20 doors in 20 minutes and made $1 million in 100 days and all that kind of stuff. And what I love about Barry and Donna is you guys talk about just do one damn deal. Just learn how to crack the code, and then you've got a skill for life. And whether you do tons of deals or whether you do a couple as a side gig like I do, you still have that skill.
Yeah.
That's my two bits.
That is so true. Do that first damn deal and it opens the door. Jared, what about you? And then we'll finish with Crystal.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo Deb, get that first deal out of the way. And even if you're going to make mistakes along the way, just as I have, just as Deb, just as any wholesaler in the history of life, right, has done. You're going to make mistakes. Don't let it deter you, right? You're going to hit road bumps. You're going to hit roadblocks. You're going to hit difficult sellers. You're going to get screamed at you're going to get screamed right in your face. You might even I've been spat at before, right? So don't let angry sellers, don't let people who are mean-spirited, don't let hurdles stop you, right? And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is to take your course, Barry. Like that started it all for me.
Well, that's I appreciate you saying that, Jared. And then we've ramped it up by about 4 times for this full day course coming up on March 18th. Crystal, what about you?
Yeah, and both, like echoing both of them again, because you're right. You know, people will often get into real estate because they hear the uber success stories of like becoming a millionaire after like a year, and you know, like that does happen occasionally. It's very rare though, and I think when you're going into the industry and the business with this mindset that you're gonna be this and that like within such a short period of time, and then you don't achieve that, it can be very discouraging. So I think going into wholesaling with an attitude of enjoying the process and accepting that there's going to be a lot of failures, but those failures are lessons, and the most successful people have more fails than success. So it's about not giving up.
And that's such a great finishing note, folks. It's about not giving up.
Yeah,
I totally agree. Well, thank you guys all for coming on and sharing your stories. Obviously, from the chat, you can see that they're extremely popular. Looking forward to seeing you all next weekend in Calgary, because these 3 wonderful investors are all coming to Calgary on March 18th to help us out with our full day wholesaling workshop. So on that note, I'll say thanks again, and we will talk to everyone later.
awesome. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Adios.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.